Lawyers, why did that one couple call off the divorce? My parents told my sister and I that they were getting a divorce. Dad found out about his cancer before they went through with it. My mom stuck with him and took care of him through his passing. My aunt and uncle recently decided not to get divorced. He's legitimately crazy and on his fourth wife. She doesn't speak any English and is with him for his pension. This divorce started because he ran up a large amount of credit card debt buying worthless art at auction. He wanted to mortgage their shared house to pay it off, but she wouldn't sign for that because it would just make a bad situation worse. Thus he wanted to divorce her for not signing, and she wanted to divorce him to secure her half of the money from his antics. They recently decided to call it off, though. My uncle's logic for calling it off was that he doesn't want to pay the lawyer's fees. He doesn't really care about losing half his money, but he's not willing to give a cent to the lawyer. My aunt's reason was that she realized she's 13 years younger than him and that she could just outlive him and get all the money. So, they remain unhappily married. I do a lot of divorces in my practice, and typically the ones that get called off are the younger couples that decide they did not make a good enough effort to save the marriage. Half the time, it'll see the client again in about 6 months. The other half seems to work out. The only case that stands out in my memory is a case that was nearing the end. Both attorneys had put in a lot of work. Mediation had been semi-successful, and we were fairly confident we were going to be able to settle the divorce without a full-blown trial. But we knew that a couple issues might have to be decided by the judge. It was clear that the divorce was going to happen though. One day, I get a call from my client. He told me he didn't want the divorce anymore, and he gave me his reason why. I informed him that we couldn't stop the divorce from happening if his wife wanted to press forward. He told me his wife wanted to call off the divorce as well for the same reason, which I'll get to in a moment. I called Doc, and he informed me that his client wanted to call off the divorce as well. For the same reason. Apparently, both parties had been visited by God on the same night, and he demanded that they honor their vows and make the marriage work. Keep in mind both parties had spent a lot of time and money already. I asked Doc what his thoughts were, and he said, who are we to argue with God? We had a good laugh, and they are still married to this day. When I was a kid, the neighbor's dad ran off, went to get cigs, and never came back. He was a rich banker type and his wife was a harried stay-at-home mom with 3 boys about my age. About 10 years later, and she's a real estate agent making decent money. She lost weight, dresses nice, etc. Basically the MILF next door. She has a fiance, but is technically still married, so starts the legal proceedings. Guy comes back to appear in court, sign papers, etc. and falls head over heels in love again with his estranged wife. She takes him back and dumps the fiancé. My friends, the 3 boys down the street, hated their dad for leaving and couldn't believe their mom took him back. Divorce lawyer here. Seen a few reconciliations over the years. Couple of cases I've seen. Husband completed rehab and was fully committed to sobriety. Separation where one party was living in a Marriott suite for a month, not securing own residence. Just too hard on the family going through just that transition, much less an entire divorce. 2 parents realizing that they couldn't put the kids through the process of a divorce at that time. 2 elder parties who just realized it made no financial sense to be divorce taxes, health insurance, etc. One thing to definitely make clear is that lawyers for the most part are actually happy to see 2 people not get divorced, especially if there are kids involved. Yes, we don't get paid as much, but there's always someone getting divorced. As a divorce lawyer, you accept that you traffic in human misery, and sometimes it's just nice to see people staying together. Reconciliations when it's for the best and adoptions, those are the best parts of the job. Not a lawyer, but I worked as an assistant in a family law courtroom. Down to the last 2 cases for the judge to hear for the day, and they could not have been more different. The first one was a 10+ year divorce, where the 2 parties could not stand the sight of one another. Over the course of their case, the parties were belligerent to one another, the other party's legal counsel, and even towards the children, if it seemed that they were back quote on the wrong side. Throughout their many appearances in court, I honestly wondered what they were going to do with all the free time of not being in litigation when this was all over. Second couple was much younger, they did not have lawyers, and it was their first appearance for their divorce. During the first case's proceedings, the second couple stepped outside. At first I thought it was for the other couple's privacy, and didn't come in until the very end of the first couple's hearing. When they were called in, they just walked in and said they didn't want to pursue the divorce until they gave their marriage a better shot. They realized things could be much worse, and seeing a disastrous divorce put things into perspective. I did not see the second couple again while I worked at the courthouse, but eventually saw them at the local supermarket a month or so later with their kids, so I guess it's working out so far. My parents called off their divorce. My mom didn't make enough money to take care of the kids alone. She would have had to move us all back to our home country, where she would have had family help. My dad didn't want to lose me, so they stayed together. In the end they divorced 10 years later. Not a lawyer, but an assistant to a family law attorney. Had a call yesterday from a woman looking for a divorce, but was unsure how to go about it. Her husband has traumatic brain injury and therefore can't sign any legal papers himself. The reason she wants the divorce though is so that she can be paid for taking care of her husband. Apparently she can't be paid as in home care while they are married, so she decided to jump on the divorce train. Obligatory edit. I get why she would do it after reading the below comments, but when I got the call yesterday it was a huge change from the usual stories I hear. Attorney in South Africa. When I was a candidate I joined the firm when a contested divorce was finally reaching the trial date. Getting to trial for a contested divorce in South Africa can sometimes take years, due to the immense amount of expensive legal sheet the parties pull on each other. The day before the trial both parties decide to reconcile, only informing the principal attorney the day of the trial. While my principal was angry, he still had money on trust and could pay the advocate's day fee. Well, it didn't work out, and a year later we get to the parties an uncontested divorce. I had to drive the client to the high court for it. My principal was done with their sheet and had me drive him, and he informed me that he was meeting the soon-to-be ex-wife at a hotel afterwards. Turns out they could still enjoy king each other, but couldn't stand living with each other. My parents called off this twice. They separated and lived apart for about 6 months each time. They hid the fig thing well as it blindsided us kids each time, and it crushed my dad. Only time I've ever seen him cry was mom telling us he was moving out. In the end, each time, he just caved on his position regarding the issue because he couldn't stand not seeing us each day. My sister was the result of their last reconciliation, and the last 20 years has been the longest stint without an attempted divorce. Not a lawyer. My parents called off their divorce 3 to 5 times over the span of 10 years. I wanted them to split up because it was obvious they weren't meant for each other. My mom's reason for not going through with it was a typical stay together for the kids scenario. Although her and I had a rough relationship during my teenage years, and one of the times she told me the divorce was my fault. My dad's reasoning, as we found out later, was a lot more messed up. Each time he asked for a divorce it was because he was cheating and tried to leave my mom for the other woman. But every time the woman would reject him and he would go back to my mom. It was a different woman each time. They did finally divorce when I was 17, and it was messy and traumatic for everyone involved. But things are significantly better now that they are not together. Not a lawyer, but my parents called off their divorce. I'm pretty sure they weren't all that serious about the divorce in the first place, but my dad left in the middle of the night after an argument. We were having money problems, so they fought a lot, but I don't think either of them ever left the house until this point. He stupidly went to stay with his much younger, attractive student, both adults. My dad had taught her 4 years at TAFE. She and many other students of his have close relationships with my parents. My mum took this as a personal assault and confirmation that he was cheating, so started the divorce process. My dad got an apartment. They both struggled even more apart. My brother had a school performance and they both reconnected. He moved back in that week and got out of his lease. They dropped the divorce. I was pretty young, so there was probably a lot that went on that I didn't see, but it seemed to me very hasty and not thought through tbh. Edit. My dad didn't have an affair. My mum just assumed that's because he stayed at a female friend's place instead of a guy's place. Not a lawyer, but this one hits close to home. Currently divorcing my bipolar wife of 13 years because she's in a 14-month-long manic/psychotic episode where she compulsively cheats with a man. That's the TL doctor. It's insanely complex. I can't stand it, and it's probably the only option to let her completely crash and burn in her fantasy so she may start to heal. But sometimes, for a few days, the mania recedes and she's back and she realizes what she's done and she's scared of herself, of the disease, of her future. And I know she loves me and I feel like shit because it's like him putting down a sick puppy. In the Solana, because she never could hold to a job due to her BP. She's going to be ducked, really ducked. And I really want to stop everything, but I know that her anxiety will creep back and she'll have another panic attack and reshito him again. I would stop everything in a heartbeat if we could get that shit under control. But I feel we tried everything. FCK that disease. Funny story. Not a lawyer but. When my older sister was 3, my parents were thinking about getting a divorce. They had been married 6 years at that point. They were separated and discussing details amicably when one night they got // friendly. Well, as they continue to discuss divorce over the next few months, my mother realizes she's pregnant with me, so they decide to give it another shot. Spoiler alert, it ends in an extremely messy divorce 13 years later. My dad cheated on my mom and then left her for the other woman. Plus a whole lot of other manipulation and mental abuse. But hey, I exist, so there is that. Not a lawyer. My brother-in-law's parents were getting a divorce, but then decided to wait until the last kid was an independent adult before getting divorced. They didn't let the kids know until the youngest was 16. I don't think they hated each other, but they were seeing other people after the kids knew. They let the kids know that they were basically roommates for the time being and that it was okay. They made sure that the kids didn't have to live or pick sides. Whatever the reason was for not being together as a couple, they kept to themselves. We still don't know the reason. All I know is that none of the kids feel like it was anyone's fault, had happy lives, and love both the parents. Both parties are happy not being together, and the divorce was very clean. I did family law for a while, and one client that stuck out was this chill Rasta guy whose wife was divorcing him because of his many affairs. Now, this couple were in their 70s at the time, so I thought it was a bit weird that she waited so long. When we got to court, we had to wait a few hours for the hearing. My client and his soon-to-be ex-wife spent the whole time cuddling and joking with each other. They were obviously still very much in love. After the hearing, I talked to him about it, and he told me that they weren't really divorcing over the affairs. Both of them had lots of affairs throughout the marriage and they were in a quasi-open relationship. No, the reason they were divorcing was that he had gotten busted for possession too many times, and because of this, he had managed to rack up a bunch of debts and pending criminal matters. They had decided that if they got divorced, she wouldn't have to worry about his debts, and he figured he could delay the criminal proceedings by reason of family hardship, possibly until he died. I don't think their plan holds water, but it was what they wanted to do, so we helped them through a very amicable divorce. I went to high school with a girl, let's call her a B. His mom and stepdad had married and divorced at least 4 times. They were just getting back together for their next marriage as me and a B drifted apart. They'd been approached by numerous magazines and talk shows about it. It still baffles me why they didn't just keep it to a relationship rather than getting divorced/remarried each time, making a huge deal about it. My grandma's parents divorced when she was 4. Her mom took her to Denmark to live with her grandparents and her. My grandma grew up, came back to the US, she was still a citizen, and started a family of her own. Her dad apparently got remarried and had 4 more kids. When the first 3 of my grandma's kids were in high school, her mom came back over to live with her and my grandpa and help with the kids. Eventually, after nearly 40 years, my great-grandpa was so disillusioned with his new family, he left them all kids grown and remarried my great-grandma. They lived together happily to their mid-90s and died 8 months apart. My great-grandma was still kicking, but the doctor said she was so sad after he died, she just let herself go. She basically died of a broken heart. This doesn't quite answer the question, but man is it a weird one. P.S. My most of grandma's half-siblings hate her for no reason we can figure out. Not either, but my husband and I filed for divorce around year 7 year itch, but after decided to try counseling. It actually really helped, and so life went on. About a year later the divorce attorney we jointly filed with called to ask if we wanted to come in to finalize the paperwork and finish the process. We had completely forgotten about the paperwork and such, and yes, the lawyer was both happy and surprised that we decided against the divorce. Took a little while to get the automatic child support situation straightened out with the state though. Well, there was this one couple that was 100% set on a divorce. They were arguing about who would get what and what would happen to their kid and the dog. They decided that the kid would move from house to house every year because the dad was moving far away. Then they look at the dog. They both loved the dog more than anything. The one problem was the dog couldn't go in planes. The dog brought them both back together, and from what I heard they didn't argue again.